unpacking executive presence. So Lorraine, this is a trait or skill that many people have challenges with. So from the first persona, someone who's already a big company executive, let's say managing 50 plus people, maybe hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars of business. What's your top advice for that type of person to develop executive presence to have CEO level like gravitas?
First thing I want to say about executive presence is that it's this phrase that's kind of nebulous. Like we all have a different definition of it, and it can mean you have like a lot of like coded meanings behind it. There have been a lot of changes to executive presence over the past decade or so. There was this really interesting data published in Harvard Business Review, Jason. I'm not sure if you saw it, but it basically showed the difference in executive presence from 2012 to 2022 and how people perceived it. And so I think it changed for the better, right? There was like a lot more people-centric skills that were needed in 2022 versus things like forcefulness or physical attractiveness, which is, or like how fit you are, which were things that were seen as executive presence in 2012. And so for me, thinking about, the executive leader, how can you really exude executive presence? At that point, you already have a lot of the skills or like the je ne sais quoi that got you there, the gravitas, the communication skills, the credibility. I think what really differentiates you with strong executive presence is your ability to communicate very clearly and transparently, especially in times of change or when there's bad news that you have to share. It can be so easy to try to cushion things or pad things, but I know from my own experience, like through a layoff, through just other, things that are happening in the business that maybe aren't ideal, if a leader is transparent and clear, even if it's bad news, you already like feel so much you think more positively of that person and you're like, okay, not great news, but they were direct with me, they respected me enough to tell me the truth.
It's interesting. So Ethan co-teaches a cracking the C-suite class with his best executive coach, Sue Bathanis. And it's mostly for VPs wanting to crack the C-suite. And you nailed exactly what Sue was saying too. The most important trait for a C-level executive is to be clear. So I'm curious your thoughts. Why do you think even senior leaders have challenges with just being clear and being transparent? Why do you think that is?
A lot of it, I think, stems down to the busyness of our day and not always understanding our audience, especially in the world that we live in now. It's like some of us are hybrids, some of us are remote, we're distributed.
Mhm.
There's like Slacks pinging off all the time, there's emails, there's like a lot of things happening. And so to communicate clearly, you have to think clearly. But if you haven't given yourself time to think and you don't have that space to really say, okay, what am I really trying to say here? What's the message I want to give? What's the best medium to give that message? It's going to be hard to be clear. And so I think it's partly taking the time to really think about it and then yeah, and then you have to make sure you're doing it in the right channel because there are a lot of different ways we can communicate those messages and then understand your audience as well.
Yeah, that matches what we see too on the executive
Yeah.
levels. It's we get a lot of questions of I'm so busy. How do I
Yeah.
make time to deeply think or read, right?
Yeah.
And then the short answer is the best leaders they make the time. Usually first thing in the morning before the world wakes up and distracts them. It reminds me of that quote. I forgot where it stems from, but not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers. I
Okay.
think first heard it from Ryan Holiday about
Yeah.
Stoicism. Uh, but it's about that approach of being intentional about thinking time.
I like
Um,
that.
okay, so that makes sense. Okay, so the other persona, someone who's more mid-level in their career, but this is also someone who frequently presents to executives, maybe a weekly business review, monthly business review. What can they do to exude executive presence to senior leaders?
Yeah, so two things come to mind for that level. The first, again, I'm going to repeat it because it's so important. You have to understand your audience. So, different executives want to consume information in different ways. So, making sure you understand how they like to consume information and what's important to them is going to be really critical to making sure that your message is well received. And then the second thing that is really critical is to provide recommendations, provide solutions. So not just here's what we did, but here's what we did, and we think this is the next step. or here's what we did and we see this potential problem, but here's how we plan to mitigate it. So when you can take that little extra step and provide the why or the how and sort of predict what the executive might ask you, that really makes you stand out. And I think that really shows that you are leadership material and thinking more strategically beyond just your like immediate, this is what I'm doing right now.
I agree. Always provide your point of view because you want to
Mhm.
show you don't just have the data and information, but you have the judgment to provide a perspective or a recommendation. Um, Going back, I forgot to mention this earlier about the be clear to give context to everyone. Uh, you want to be clear on your mission, your vision, the expectations, the success metrics, and then the action plan. But then you can delegate it to your reports and your teams to scale. Okay, but Lorraine, on this specific question, we had a good question in chat. Do you use a specific framework to understand your audience and who the recipient is, what they
Mhm.
like?
I do.
Ah,
This is so funny because it's a framework in my book. This was not a plant in the audience. Thank you, Manjanath. So I use something called the Think, Do, Feel framework. And the Think, Do, or matrix rather, the Think, Do matrix was created by this professor named Andrew Abella. And what it does, you imagine like think, do, now, after. So you think about figure out what does your audience currently think? What do you want them to think afterwards, after they see your presentation? What do they currently do? What do you want them to do afterwards? And then my colleague and one of my mentors, Spencer Waldron, he added the feel category. So how do they currently feel about the topic that you're speaking on? How do you want them to feel afterwards? And so it's a simple matrix. You don't have to spend like hours on it. Just jot down some things, some ideas, and you'll realize pretty quickly, oh, I don't really even know what they think currently about this topic. Let me better understand that so I can frame and position my message more impactfully so that I can get them to this sort of after space that I want them to live in. And so that's a really helpful framework, I think, for understanding your audience. And, if you're like, I have some gaps here, it's the perfect prompt for you to be like, okay, gotta ask some questions and get some information before I present.
I love the addition of the feel part too,
Yeah.
because it ties back to when you're dealing especially with impatient, busy senior leaders,
Mhm.
you have to be, you have to use discernment in picking your battles,
Yeah.
right? You have to know which ones are worth it to
Yeah.
push and disagree, and which ones you're like, you know what? It's fine. Let's just go with this one.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a dance, but it's that feel part that makes a lot of sense. And I also agree, when you go into these high stakes meetings, let's call it, have in your back pocket your FAQs that you believe the senior leaders will ask you.
Yep.
And do that prep work in advance, right? And we have something called at Amazon, it was called rude FAQs. And these are the harsh, candid questions that just be prepared for. Um, so
I love that point because a lot of people, we get so focused on our presentation and we're like, we got to get this perfect. And you forget about the Q&A, but the Q&A is super, super important as well. And sometimes more important because executives, they might just cut you off and they have their own list of questions in their head that they just want to get out.
exactly. Yeah, I think the Q&A is the most interesting discussion because, like you said, most executives they probably have a pretty strong point of view, and it's like it's like jab, jab, jab. They're gonna go pretty fast,
Yeah.
so you got to roll with that. Okay. Um, the third persona for someone who's starting out in their career, let's say 3, maybe 5 years less experience. Uh, what can they do to show that to give a glimpse to leaders that they've got it? Because that whole saying like, oh, that person's got it, but it's so ambiguous. We have no idea what that means. It kind of ties to executive presence.
Yeah.
What do you think there?
When you are just starting out, I think it's really important to know how to execute well, do your job very well, be known for that. We all have a brand at work. So I talk about career brand a lot in the book. And career brand is essentially personal brand, which is essentially reputation. And so when you're starting off, a lot of what you're going to build your credibility on and what people know you for is that really great work. Now, when you are newer to a company and also more junior in your career, you have this really unique opportunity where you can do a bunch of informational interviews within the company and you can have that like eagerness, like, oh, I want to meet someone from design, I want to meet someone from product, I want to meet someone from data. And when you can be that person who has a more holistic perspective of what's going on in other parts of the company, you can then connect the dots. And so I think that's something that younger folks in their career are, very well positioned to do. So do really great work and then also take advantage of that earliness in your career to meet as many people as you can and find out what other people are doing.
I agree. I'll summarize the three key personas. So early in your career, execute and deliver results well. That's how you gain credibility. Mid-level who presents to executives, show your high judgment and discernment with recommendations and solutions. And then the senior leaders, be clear. Show that you are a big leader that can lead big teams.